What does this coup attempt signify in terms of the general trend of government overthrows in Africa lately?
I think we're seeing that the trend is definitely not slowing down. The trend toward what some people refer to as sovereignism, where even though we don't have a very clear picture of what exactly this particular coup attempt set out to accomplish, but based on the little fragments of information that have come out, it is clear that they seem to be of the opinion that the perceived influence of France, the perceived neo-colonial influence of France over the affairs of Benin, was something that this coup was meant to fix, so to speak. So it's clear that the wave of, if you call it nationalism, if you call it anti-colonialism, if you call it sovereignism, if you call it Pan-Africanism, whatever you call it, that wave is actually not slowing down anytime soon. And the reason it's significant that this has happened in Benin is that this is a country that has traditionally been a very strong partner of France in the West African sub-region. So for it to happen here, of all places, then, even though it would seem now the authorities claim that this coup attempt has been put down and the situation supposedly has returned to normal, what that does signify is that if it can happen in somewhere that the French would have thought that they had locked down, such as Benin, then what's to say that it's not going to happen in Cote d'Ivoire or in Gabon or in Senegal or in Congo Republic? There's really nothing to say. So I think that's the most significant thing to take away from this. Now, regardless of whether this has succeeded or not, it certainly looks at this point like it has not succeeded. But that regardless of that being the case, the underlying issues that led to this coup will lead to other coups. This is not something that we have heard the last of by any means.
Right now, why do you think Nigeria and ECOWAS forces decided to enter Benin to help the government from the reports we're getting lately?
Help the government is a very interesting way of putting it, because at the point where the Nigerian military made its entry into the fray, it was very unclear exactly what the government of Benin was at that time. And it's also very clear that the message that was put out by the French President Emmanuel Macron earlier today, the timing of the message where he said that he spoke to the Nigerian president, basically signaled to everybody that essentially a geopolitical instruction was delivered from Paris to Abuja that under no circumstances must this coup be allowed to succeed. This has happened before, as recently as 2 years ago in Niger, where something very similar happened. Some very similar noises were made. At that time, the actual military invasion from Nigeria didn't end up materializing, even though the Nigerian president tried his best to make it materialize to the point of actually circumventing the National Assembly and trying to launch airstrikes illegally in the sovereign territory of another country without Senate approval, which is against Nigerian law. This time around, it seems like the exact playbook that was meant to be followed in 2023 has been followed to the letter. This time around, before the intention even became public, these actions had already been carried out, right? These mobilizations had already been carried out. So by the time Macron came out with a statement, by the time the Nigerian authorities came out with their various statements, this was already done. They had already. So what this signifies to me is that, putting ECOWAS aside for a second, the Nigerian government and the Nigerian military specifically has a very new type of relationship with the French government, the type of relationship that maybe you would expect the likes of Cote d'Ivoire or Senegal to have had. And why that is significant, to my eyes, is that Nigeria was not colonized by the French. Nigeria is not an ex-colony of France. Nigeria traditionally has had some sort of firewall in its relations with France, but where since 2023, when the new Nigerian president came in, Tinubu, it seems as if that firewall has been taken down, and the sort of outsized influence that the likes of the US and UK have had in Nigeria in decades past, France appears to be building up that sort of influence in Nigeria now, which is unprecedented and perhaps signifies a new geopolitical approach to maintaining French influence in West Africa, or perhaps in Africa, where France is no longer apparently seeking to just partner with its former colonies, but is actually actively seeking to expand its sphere of influence even to the Anglophone region. And then the eventual entry of ECOWAS into the fray, where they put out that statement, which you referenced earlier, I think that is essentially a rubber stamp on a decision that has already been made primarily in Paris, that any coup that has as one of its stated goals the removal of French influence or European influence from West Africa, that coup regime must not be allowed to stand. And this is not just me saying this. Barely a week ago, we had a supposed coup in Guinea-Bissau, which did not by any means generate any of this reaction. Guinea-Bissau is also in West Africa. It's also an ECOWAS member state. And there was none of this reaction. There was none of these frenzied statements. There was no military reaction, nothing of the sort. And the coup was actually allowed to stand, because that was a different type of coup. That was a coup that preserved the status quo, the neo-colonial status quo. This was a coup that threatened it. And clearly the geopolitical instruction from Paris is, under no circumstances must this be allowed to stand. So using first and foremost Nigerian military power now, which is a new dimension, in West African public relations, where we don't know how this is going to end, and then using ECOWAS as a sort of geopolitical rubber stamp after the fact to give the decision that was made in Paris a veneer of local acceptability.
All right, now, can you help break it down for us? What interest might France hold in Benin? Why are they so eager to support the current president?
Well, there are a number of reasons, but primarily why Benin has become so important, especially since 2023, is that Benin is one of the very few countries it's a coastal West African state. It's an ECOWAS member state, but also has two borders with two of the Sahelian alliance states. So it has borders with Burkina Faso and with Niger, extensive borders as well. So essentially, the outsized influence of France in Benin gives France the capacity to, at the very least, monitor those countries. And we've seen this practically. It's been reported extensively how surveillance flights being run by the French Air Force have been, used Benin as essentially a de facto French base for surveillance of the Sahelian alliance, right? And then I believe the authorities in Burkina Faso have complained on a number of occasions that terror attacks that vector in from the southern border of Burkina Faso with Benin, it always seems to happen very strangely, that where it's been confirmed that there's a French base less than 50 kilometers from the Beninese border with Burkina Faso, and that seems to be the exact general location where these terrorists always seem to come out from, carry out an attack in Burkina Faso, and go back across the border. If you recall, there was actually a huge diplomatic dispute between Benin and the AES. For the longest time, the Nigerian border with Benin was actually closed because of these security concerns. So my reading of the situation is, and well, not just my reading, the reading of several people who have knowledge of this situation, is that France has essentially used Benin since 2022 or 2023 as a de facto staging point for whatever geopolitical or military aspirations it has in the Sahel, now that it has lost influence there. So if Benin were to fall to what France considers to be the same forces that are active in the Sahel, that would essentially mean that not only has France lost a major vector point into the AES, a major attack, potential attack route, but also that the AES would have been given a port for the first time, because that is one of the strategic weaknesses of the AES, that is fully landlocked and is dependent on relationships with countries like Togo and Ghana for access to the ocean. If Benin were to fall, then the AES automatically has one of the busiest ports in West Africa, which changes the entire dynamic completely. So from a French point of view, it's easy to see why it was important that this coup must not be allowed to succeed. The AES must remain sort of isolated, in the artificially isolated way that it has become, and Benin must remain a de facto French staging point. Now, how long that is going to last after this, nobody knows, but we'll see.
All right. Now, Benin's president has not made an address to the nation yet. What do you think is going on there? Why the radio? Why are they silent?
Again, I think the situation is still a bit fluid. Based on the fact that there were airstrikes, I think it's fair to say that if the situation was already settled fully and the coup had failed decisively, there wouldn't have been any need for something as, for the use of overwhelming force like airstrikes. So obviously I must state that this is sort of unconfirmed reporting, but the reporting that I have had access to from the ground states that some of the military barracks where the coup, the personnel involved in the coup have apparently been pulled out, where the buildings that were targeted in these airstrikes. So if that were to be the case, then it's clear that this issue has not been solved decisively. even if the majority of the country supposedly is back under the control of the status quo, there still exists some pockets of resistance that are yet to be put down. Clearly, there is at least a faction of the Beninese military which is not on board with the return to the status quo. That is very evident. So I would imagine that they're basically waiting to see how this is going to play out. I don't think we've heard the last of the sort of airstrikes or military deployments or any of that sort of thing. I think going into tomorrow, there's still going to be more of that activity. I don't think this has been settled just yet. So I think that's what this is. They're probably mopping up and waiting to see how this is going to fully play out before they eventually reappear and do the victory dance that we expect them to do.
All right. We have to leave it here now. David Hundeyin, the investigative journalist, thank you for speaking with us.
Thank you for having me.